All right. Welcome, everybody. We've been looking forward to this day for some time. We have four special guests from around the globe. Morten Asphalt from Alberta, Chris North from New Zealand, Takako Takano from Japan, and Janneke Hayem from Norway. So thank you all for making time to be here today. Yeah, it's just wonderful to get you all together. And one thing that you all have in common as outdoor educators is that you're outdoor educators who work, or at least have worked and work in higher education, working with often slightly older students and participants, and you have taken these students to places that are sometimes quite far away from the school or institution for the purposes of learning as part of some kind of educational program. This has involved some kind of travel, maybe by public transport, maybe by van, maybe by plane, train, and so on. But inevitably, all those kinds of transport come with some kind of carbon emission. So the kind of the $1 million question that we want to get at today and unpack is, given the carbon costs of traveling to places that are further away for educational programs, how do we come to be able to judge what is important enough as an educational objective where we can accept there will be some kind of carbon emission? How do we negotiate that? So that's the background for those watching to this conversation. And so we're going to, everybody has, all our four panelists have made a Pecha Kucha. It's 3 minutes long, 20 slides each. And if you're interested, well, you should be interested. If you're watching this, you're interested, I hope. So give those a watch. They're only 3 minutes each. And they'll give some useful background on everybody's kind of key points. And now we're going to just have a conversation for the next little while. So here we go. So we're going to start with Chris. One thing, Chris, that you said was key here was about getting participants involved in the offsetting. And there's a couple of ways that can be done.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah. The kind of question that was posed to us as panelists was, how do we kind of balance up the kind of educational benefits versus the climate change contribution that we make? And so one of the ways that I addressed in my Pecha Kucha was by reducing the amount of carbon we emit, not by not traveling, but by offsetting. One of the things that I am concerned about is the idea of just paying some money. And it's kind of buying your way out of taking responsibility and doing something that is tangible. So I want to challenge that in my program by having students understand the pragmatics of what carbon offsetting looks like, how we calculate that, and how we actually enact that. So that involves, in my case, I have a canoe expedition course which goes over to the other coast of the South Island. So that's about 4 hours drive each way, towing a big canoe trailer and taking a few vans. What we do is we calculate how much carbon that emits, and then we look at how much we need to plant in order to offset that. And some of the things that have been really interesting in my own personal learning about this is it's not just about planting the trees or the plants, it's also about ensuring that they don't die. I mean, there's a very effective sustainable model that's not very sustainable, which is there's always opportunities to plant trees. We've planted, 1,000 trees, they will die. We can still plant 1,000 trees. It's a sustainable model. You don't need more land. People just pay you money and you say, yes, we've planted those trees. The challenge is to make sure those trees actually grow to their full size and absorb that carbon over many decades. And that's quite an involved discussion to have with students. And it involves maths, involves ecology, and it involves understanding how those all come together.
I'd love to jump in, but really let's get one of the other panelists a comment perhaps, or question for Chris.
I like Chris's measurement because that's part of the learning outcome. I think it is very important to have the students aware of climate change and sort of consequences what we do.
I really love the idea about making it tangible, making it something that you actually can see. Like Chris said, you don't know what the carbon offset looks like. So, and I think that's important in teaching, that making some kind of pictures and so that it's easier to understand what we're actually talking about. I realize how cultural this is as well. I mean, in Norway, we have a problem with overgrowth. It wouldn't help to plant trees because the tree level is rising. We have too much trees, so we need to get the animals out to eat the grass so that the tree level doesn't rise. So we would have to find other solutions on the problem.
Maybe this would be an opportunity to continue with you, Janneke. And one of your points was that students need to be involved in the planning and implementation and reflection. Could you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, I think one of the things that there was the higher education, outdoor education, when to the outdoor recreation field, it's that the students should come along in the planning, and they should be a part of how we do it, not only to experience what we plan for them, but to be a part of the planning as well. So starting out with what do you need to learn, and how can we get to that knowledge is what decides also where we want to go. So when doing trip plans, that's our starting point.
Right. So starting with the learning objectives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We also have discussions with the students when we're actually there, when we ask, why are we here? And like this fall up in the mountains, we had traveled 4 hours by bus from Oslo, and sitting up in this nice mountain area and ask them to be in small groups and make up a list. Why did we actually end up here? And having that discussion is then we base our teaching in the what this place actually can offer here.
So Janneke, I guess my question is, what kind of timeframes are you able to do these trips over?
The longest trips we have with our students is 7 days, and then we think we can go a bit further away than in the shorter trips, but mostly it's from 3 to 5, 6 days.
I wonder if this is a good segue into Morten's Pecha Kucha, when one of the key points that you made, Morten, was get out and stay out. So that's another way to think about this. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you work with the get out and stay out?
Sure. One of them is that I do think that the longer you're out, and I don't know where the magic number is. For some reason, sort of 21, 25 days has kind of become my magic number. And I can't tell you exactly how I came to that other than maybe tradition. But I think there's something valuable about that. And well, as you know, I believe strongly that there's a time and a place for not necessarily far away, but long immersion. And for me, that happens to be far away. And I think that's more related to my life growing up in the Canadian North, and that it's a place that I know, so that I feel like it's a place that I can make meaning out of that place for students because I know the place. So I don't think I could justify 21 days, in some place I've never been with students, because I don't know how I would use that. I don't know how I would make that place come alive, but I can make the North come alive. So, and one of the interesting experiences I'm having right now is because I won't get into why, but I'm teaching an outdoor skills course that is 3 hours once a week. I haven't left campus yet. And I'll have to say that I think some students are learning some good things, but one of the things that I'm really noticing is there's no consequences. You can show up in a pair of runners and a pair of jeans and you can be wet for 3 hours, and they haven't had that yet, unfortunately. But it doesn't matter because you're 2 seconds from a warm building. So I think that, from a learning point of view, I think there's some real value in getting out and staying out because it allows immersion. And then, I don't think I ever thought about this from the sustainability lens, but I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, I was on a 3 or 4 week Arctic canoe trip with students, and we talked about sustainability. So this was not scientific, but it was informative. And we thought, okay, how many gallons of fuel did we burn in the 2 vehicles we drove 20 hours, in the 2 airplanes that we flew in? And when we added up the liters of fuel and then thought about, okay, if you weren't here as a student, what would you be doing during this 4-week period? And actually, the carbon footprint was about the same. So I don't know that we're increasing carbon footprint as much as we're shifting carbon footprint. So in that way, I think get out and stay out is better, because once you're out, certainly if you're on a self-propelled trip, then the carbon footprint is relatively low.
When Morten is talking about get out and stay out, I mean, when I am talking about long expeditions in Norway, we go with bus for 4 hours or with train, but you're talking about 20 hours drive and a plane, and so it's kind of a distance as well. That's kind of a difference, really. But because you asked us at what point is it worth going away for multi-day trips, and I was thinking that a multi-day trip doesn't necessarily imply to go remote or go far away. We have multi-day trips that starts and ends at campus as well. We can go directly into the forest, and that of course reduce the carbon offset quite much.
That's a good point, Jannica. And just to clarify, we do some trips here where, you drive 2.5 hours and you're gone for a week or something like that. So certainly the 3 and 4 week things, those are the, I don't want to say extreme, but we do also do things that are closer.
Morten, I really liked I like the ratio of travel time to out time. There's some kind of thing there that you should definitely spend a lot more time out there than you do in a vehicle getting there. And I think that's an interesting measure. And what really resonated for me was also your comments about over this time frame compared to regular life, where how much carbon is being emitted. That's another measure that I hadn't thought about before. It's like you know, especially if people are using vehicles regularly, like a lot of students do, then, you know, these trips where they're actually being human powered for many days is changing the way that the location and the way that that carbon is being emitted. And also what I'm thinking about is, if students learn they can use their bodies to get around, and they can paddle a canoe, they can ride a bike, they can walk themselves, that opens up different avenues and opens their eyes to new possibilities that, I guess, ties into some of the things that several people said, like, I know that Takakoa talked about links to daily life. Like, how would it be if we used that physicality of moving your own body without fossil fuels, and applied that to everyday life? How might that look?
Takako, I wonder if this is we could shift to your talk and a couple of the points you made, and one of them was that about looking at this in a much longer time scale. So it's not just about the trip, it's about everything that you're doing in your life. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Thanks, Simon. What you just mentioned, and I also talked about in Pecha Kucha, links to many different aspects we already covered. Say, for example, this is also a link with offsetting. If you do make a trip and think about the sort of environmental impact, we'd better not only thinking making it up, like, or offsetting by planting trees, but think about our daily lives, what we can do more. Say, reducing eating meat, or biking or walking more than driving. In that way, we can this is a part of the offsetting of what we did or what we emit. And I believe it is very important to, because making a trip is also part of our life, and the questions we have during the trip or learning programs, we should carry them on into our lives. So that's kind of thing that I wanted to mention. I do make, for example, personally, I make longer, flight trips to different parts of the globe. But I'm very conscious about it. And I may not plant trees to offset it, but I try not to use fossil fuel to heat my house, for example. I chop wood by myself and then, do a wood stove. And every choice is a conscious things. And then I'm always aware of environmental impact of what I do. So I try to take a balance, or try to mitigate when I can. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that fits into that holistic view of looking at this, and that makes me also think about what you said earlier, Morten, that so much of, I mean, if we look at education and educational institutions, it's just a carbon emitting machine in most cases. So it seems like there are carbon emissions involved in all aspects, or most aspects of higher education, let's say, whether it's heating the swimming pool or the lights on the playing field or whatever. And so perhaps it's unfair that outdoor education programs maybe can get singled out by being, oh, well, you're traveling to a faraway place, because it may be that our actual net carbon emissions are lower than other programs that are demanding that consume energy and thus emit carbon.
I don't feel so much pressure from other people in terms of outdoor education and sustainability as I do from within the outdoor education community. Certainly we need to think about it, but I don't think we should pull the plug on what we do because it has a carbon footprint. And it would be highly ironic if a bunch of outdoor educators pulled the plug on taking students on trips and decided that when they all traveled to England to meet together from around the world.
And I think I feel a little bit of perhaps a different perspective, because I would say, climate change is probably the single biggest issue of our time. So I do think that that we all need to be thinking about it. And that's why this conversation is so important, because we need to be part of the solution, and we need to show, I believe, our institutions that we are being proactive, and that rather than them coming to us and seeing us as laggards, people should be coming to us when they're field trips. The geology department is doing a field trip. They'll come to us and go, oh, so how do you do that? Because I understand from the institution that you've got some good systems in place or some good approaches that help you to consider the impact of your field trips. We'd love to know more. So that's kind of where I see us sitting.
Kind of setting the standard, or showing that, hey, we're taking this seriously, and we're trying to figure this out, and kind of leading. Yeah. Janneke.
Yes, I think what Chris is saying is really important. I think that education should prepare our students for the future, and they need to learn, or need to believe that they can be parts of the solutions. This can also be included in our trips. When we go away, our students learn to be present. They learn to wonder, finding new ways of doing things, to be creative. They learn how to make sense out of things. They learn perseverance, and they learn to be flexible. And I think that those are the kind of abilities that people need in the 21st century to be able to solve the huge problems that we are seeing now.
I'd love to jump in here as kind of the host's privilege, if I may. But to me, that's that's a big part of it. Is I love the expedition to the faraway place, particularly with young people, teenagers and youth and so on, because we hear all the time, oh, context is everything. Well, I think removal from context can be just so powerful, to have that. Okay, I'm far away. I'm able to have a proper look at myself, a proper look at who I am in this world. If we can take those to be central to, or a big part of the journeying, the educational journey to a faraway place, then my question then perhaps, and to all of you, is there a way to actually say, okay, here are my learning objectives. Here's the reason we're going to a further away place that might involve some carbon emission, and I've now I've weighed up my learning objectives, and I've weighed against the carbon emissions, and based on that analysis, we're going to go. Is it possible to go about this in some kind of systematic way? Question mark.
I don't know, Simon. I mean, it's a good question. I don't know if I'm being too lazy to really wrestle with it, or just saying, I know deep in my soul that there's value, and I can look back on students years after and I can see that value. I mean, I think about students you brought Takako and that you and I had together, and how Canadian students said I saw Canada through a whole new different lens because I had to help, you know, people who didn't speak the language or who'd never experienced winter see it, and they saw it better, or not better, they saw it differently. So Canadians saw the whole experience differently. So I don't know, there's a part of me that I think we have to trust our intuition to some degree here, and we have to trust our gut, and we have to not feel too much pressure to measure and justify.
Probably my position is a little similar to Morton's. To me, that is a kind of a way of thinking or etiquette or attitude to live in this 21st century already. It's not a calculation. It's not a sort of balance. It's something we all have to follow. We all have to think about how we behave. Bringing people in different places, outdoor education, experiential learning, they are very, seriously important. But I don't have to say that to you all here. But there are so much important things that brings in, and especially like Yannicka mentioned, like self-worth and sort of touching people's values. They are really important especially for young people to survive in this century. And then environmental perspective is sort of part of it. It's not something separate. It's not something to weigh because it's inevitable. We all need it. We all need to have sound environment to live on. So that's what I think.
But I think in resource economy, we learn that the value of nature is how much people want to pay for knowing it, that it's actually there. And I think we'll lose something when calculating life that way, being able to be in outdoors, to feel connection, to feel unity with nature and with the other people around us, has some values that we cannot calculate. And I think that we should not go down that road to try to measure all those things. But I think that we as outdoor educators have to find ways of conveying those values.
To calculate whether a trip is worthwhile is probably one of those questions that's kind of like minimum, is this risk acceptable? You'll never get a straight answer. It's because it's an incalculable. What is our planet worth? We could put the money down for how much, who's going to bid for the planet. But I do think it asks us as educators hard questions about how do we justify this trip given all that we know now? Are there alternatives that can give us really some of these really important learning outcomes? I know that's these future-focused kind of abilities, skills, competencies that come at a lower carbon cost. And I think I'd probably come back to Morton's idea that ultimately we have to, put our hands on our hearts and go, yeah, this is where I stand and this is why.
So it seems to me like if I'm doing a quick on the fly thematic analysis that of our discussion, there are a number of things that come up. One of them is ensuring that the learning outcomes that we have for our journeys to further away places are really clear, that we're able to articulate what is the added value of going on this trip. Their own way, being able to have an idea of what are the carbon emissions associated with such a journey are important. And then having students involved in finding ways to reduce and offset those costs. Ideas around involving students before, during, and after the trips into these discussions is something we all agree on, I think. And then another big theme that jumped out for me was the whole idea of it's not just about the trip. This is sustainability is something that we, as human beings living in the Anthropocene, need to be doing. Is it something we wrestle with every day? Have I missed anything? Does anybody want to jump in and say,
When I watched everyone's Pecha Kuchas, I thought, wow, we are all, the core message is the same, apart from a few distinctive things. But that's my impression. And also I was impressed by Annika's question. I think it was like, what is essential to learn in 21st century? That is the kind of core message that we all have to think about.
I think this conversation has showed us that we have the same challenges across the globe, and we have a bit different takes when it comes to culture and what kind of nature we live in, but at the same time we have all the same challenges, and we have very similar thoughts on the solutions and our way forward as well. And I found that really interesting and encouraging as well, that it's as a six small people living on different sides of the earth, that we can contribute in the same direction, facing our time's challenges. One reflection I had when preparing this was that your questions is about environmentally acceptable outdoor education, and that now we're wondering a bit between the environmental questions and the sustainability questions, and that sustainability includes much more than the environmental part.
Yeah, absolutely. Fair comment there.
Maybe I can't justify what I do on strictly environmental terms, but if we take it and look at it in more holistically, then I think I can justify it. So, we need to think about this question in the context of the 21st century and all the issues we're facing in the 21st century. I don't know many outdoor educators who have a single goal or a single mission for doing a trip. It's a pretty deeply woven, complex set of goals and objectives. And so in that way, maybe we need to be careful not to get too laser sharp on the environmental, because if we're doing these things only for environmental reasons, then it's a whole different set of justifications.
I certainly have nothing further to add to that. Oh, I love that. Morten, thank you. Thank you all for being here today, early in the morning, late at night, in the middle of your days, and sharing your views on this. I mean, you have all been leading educational trips, multi-day trips for decades. So, I mean, the wealth of experience that is right here in the Zoom room is quite extraordinary. So thank you so much.